Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Working in Hockey podcast. I'm your host, Nick Bowins, joined as always by Lukas Georgas, fresh off the Chicklets Cup in Boston. Excited to get into that later, but we've got a super special guest here, Sara Barshap, currently NHL Sports Trader for FanDuel. Sara, how are you today? Appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
I am doing so well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people probably hear that title, Sara, NHL Sports Trader, and they think, "Oh, that's super cool." And then their next thought is probably, "Wait, what does that mean?" As best as you can describe it, what is your role with FanDuel there? What's a day-to-day look like for you?
Absolutely. So essentially, my team, the trading team, we are the core odds making operation for the company. So anytime you go on the FanDuel Sportsbook, you see the odds there. Chances are, my team is originating those, moving those around. The day to day, it kind of differs really, especially between the in season and the off season. But regular day in the life now as we approach the NHL season is just going to be day in and day out. Everything that has to do with hockey on our sportsbook, whether it's NHL, PWHL, NCAA, really any sort of hockey league. My team is creating those odds, building the player props, managing the futures, really just being the points in contact for all things hockey that have to do with the FanDuel Sportsbook.
Obviously, that's a very unique role, right? Like I was just telling Nick before we hopped on here, that's something that like you kind of always knew someone was in charge of, but it's really like I've never met someone in that. So as much as you can share, what sort of inputs and variables factor into setting lines for an NHL game, or how do injuries or scratches, trades, things like that throw a wrench in the day-to-day plans? And is it something that's kind of always shifting and moving throughout the time?
Yeah, absolutely. Our pricing, it's super fluid, super dynamic. I think it's a common misconception, obviously, that as a sports book, we know things before everybody else does, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I wish it was a little true. It would make my life a lot easier. But yeah, we're finding out news via Twitter just the same way that everybody else is, right? So when it comes to stuff like injury news, trades, starting goalies, anything that can really move the needle in terms of a price, we have to be the first ones on it. We have to be moving off of it, evaluating how our competitors are reacting, evaluating how our customers are, what angles are they kind of taking on and betting. And then just using our subject matter expertise and sort of evaluation of where we're pricing the game and sort of figuring out where we want to move and where we don't. In terms of what goes into it, we as traders obviously have an evaluation of how each of the teams are playing. We think about teams, obviously in terms of money lines and totals for NHL, those are kind of what everything's derived off of. So, when I'm thinking about how two teams are performing against each other, I'm thinking about them in terms of, okay, how many goals better is one team than another team, factoring in different things like who I think is going to start for them, taking away or adjusting a team's rating based off of which players are injured, who's going to be on the ice that night, stuff like that. So there's tons of variables that go into it, obviously a lot of moving pieces, and we're basically just trying to paint as good of a picture as we can with information that we have of, what the product on the ice is going to be and how that game's going to go.
That's super interesting, and I think, especially, you touched on kind of just how much it shifts and how quick news breaks or things change. I think that probably always keeps you guys on your toes, like you said. What does the team look like there? You touched on kind of your role in the operation a little bit, but what's the broader team look like? How do you kind of divvy up the tasks, the games, leagues or otherwise there?
For sure. So we are very lucky. We have a global trading team. So I'm pretty much on any time in the hours of like roughly 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. When our shift ends, we pass that off to our team in Australia. They handle the majority of the live trading for NHL since most games are a 7 p.m. start or later. Then once their shift wraps up, they pass it off to our crew in Dublin. They manage kind of like the overnight early hours. And then they pass it right back over to us. In terms of the size of our trading team, so our trading team in total in North America, so that's between my office in Jersey City and our office in Toronto, who manages the majority of our our Canada product. It's roughly like 60, 65 people. In terms of NHL specifically, there's about 4 to 5 of us who work on NHL primarily in our Jersey City office, and then 3 that work out on NHL on our Toronto office. So it's one of our smaller sports groups, just in terms of trader breakdown. Obviously, and unfortunately, it is a smaller product, but definitely growing really quickly. And, we're kind of expanding in terms of what the traders do specifically. So within NHL on any given day, there's probably maximum of 5 of us on, 4 or 5 of us on for, like, a busy Saturday slate on a day where there's, only, like, 5 or so games, probably, like, 2 people managing the product. Um, we're all pretty much doing the same thing, right? At FanDuel, we don't really like we have a hierarchy, obviously, but in terms of who does what, like there's a lot of parity in that. Everyone has the opportunity to price. Everyone's privy to being able to move things, build props, pretty much manage any part of the product. Obviously, as you move up through the ranks and you're with the company for longer, you get to work a bit more cross functionally and kind of pitch in on more of like the product and the management side of things. But right now, it's as the season's still coming up, we're all kind of all hands on deck, getting the operation to where it needs to be on day one.
Very cool.
It's super interesting, and I think this is something you slightly touched on, but obviously there is the ability to do like real live, like real time betting. Is this something that you're always kind of like having to be paying attention to at once, and like you can't really like step away because if something happens? Like, what is that kind of process there? Because I know things like you said change nonstop throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to live trading, like I mentioned before, for us in our North America time zone, it's something we do a lot less of. Just in general, the league's kind of shifting away from matinees. There's a lot less of them this year than there were last year, and probably that trend will continue. So on average, I'm probably trading maybe 2 to 3 games a month. It's not a whole lot. Um, but during that process, yeah, you're pretty much locked into that game. For NHL specifically on our live trading, it's one trader to one game. So when you're that person, like you have to have eyes on everything that's happening. To try to paint a picture for you guys of what our setup looks like, we essentially have two huge wraparound monitors, a laptop, and a TV. So altogether, it's roughly like 8 desktop screens of space we're looking at any point in time. So when I'm live trading a game, I'm obviously watching the game, seeing what's going on, evaluating injuries, the game state, stuff like that, momentum in the game. I have our NHL model that kind of, is running, moving the prices. I'm kind of overseeing where they're moving to, adjusting things myself in the game, settling bets as they're happening, obviously, so we can have a good customer experience, seeing where our competitors are with their live pricing, seeing what customers are betting on live, and pretty much just making critical decisions with all of those things in mind on are our prices right? Is everything that's on site meant to be on site? Yeah, just pretty much managing the full, 360 of the game.
Very cool. And kind of two-part question here from me, Sarah. First one, putting you on the spot a little bit. You may or may not know, but would the trading department be the biggest department at a company like FanDuel then? Or kind of what's the biggest area of focus or maybe the department that has to hire the most roles?
It's a good question. So for us, that's probably going to be our software engineering department or just anything on the tech side of the company. I think a general, not necessarily misconception, but sort of rebrand that FanDuel has been trying to do over the past couple years is shifting less from being viewed as like purely a sports and entertainment company, but primarily being viewed as a tech company, because we are really tech first. That's where the majority of our investment is. And I think one of the reasons and things that I would attribute to why we've been so successful and just in general, consistently getting voted as one of the top sports books is because of the investment that we did very early on in tech and how we have continued developing that to grow our product.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. From a user side of things, one of my favorites to use for sure. Just easier than some of the others. You can't say that, but I can. What sort of skills are needed in a role like this, Sarah? Obviously it's you need some hockey experience, you need some analytical mindset, but I guess both technical and soft skills or people skills. What sort of traits do you see the most across the team there?
For sure. So I think one of the really unique things about our sort of hiring process, and even when we post a new role, is that you're never going to find us listing specific background or specific experience that you really need to do this job. And I think there's kind of a twofold reason for that. On one hand, it's a lot of people come into sports from something completely different. They might not have background in sports. It's obviously a very hard industry to kind of break into, and we're understanding of that. And we obviously never want to create a barrier to entry for somebody because of that. The second piece to it is At the end of the day, we're looking for people who have critical thinking and the computational skills to be able to, thrive and kind of do what we do. But at the end of the day, we're not doing rocket science, right? So a lot of people can acquire sort of those day-to-day skills in terms of like the statistics, the math, sort of the foundational lines of thinking that we're implementing from a variety of different backgrounds. So we don't necessarily like seek out XYZ things when we're hiring people. We're just looking for someone who has sort of the aptitude to learn and the ability to kind of demonstrate the skills that we're using. All that being said, typically the backgrounds that you will find on our team are going to be things like sports analytics, math, statistics, finance. We've had people from education, really all kind of odds and ends. But yeah, just really people who can kind of do the math and obviously know the sport to a granular enough level. To really fulfill the needs of the role. Obviously, for me specifically, that's hockey. But at the end of the day, we do work on all other sports. And even, myself as a hockey trader in the off season, I'm working on other sports like I've worked on WNBA, I've worked on college football. Other traders are, working on different things throughout the year. So really just as much as you know about as many sports as you can, it'll help build the case.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you just touched on it there, kind of what it's like in the off season. Obviously, hockey season is only for part of the year. So, what is your main focus? I guess you would say for the off season. Are you looking more at maybe futures or anything like that, or is it more I'm going to help out on other areas while it's quieter kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely a mix of both. For me, the off season is definitely a time to sort of, do performance reporting, kind of revisit what we did well and what we didn't do as well in the past NHL season. Get ahead of posting futures. Kind of want to go first to market on as much stuff as we can do there. Do any sort of like model, off season development, and kind of implement and test out new things there. Obviously, touch base with our counterparts, across partnerships and product and all the other teams that we work with to sort of lay the foundation and expectations of what new things they can expect for next year. So it's a lot of just sort of planning and reworking. But then, yeah, the other big piece of it is working on other sports. I think for me personally, there's a lot to learn from the way that other sports are doing things, learning how other markets operate, how to price other products, things like that. So the majority of my summer was spent working on WNBA. And then once college football season approached, I flipped over, started working on a bit of that. At this point, through managing NHL preseason, still working on college football, probably going to do a mix of both up until regular season. And then it's a full deep dive into the world of NHL for me. And hopefully one day the PWHL will switch to a summer schedule. I'll have hockey year round. But yeah, in the meantime, this is kind of what we're working with.
Cool, very cool. You touched on kind of the different schooling or degrees programs that you see people come through with. I know you went to Villanova. Nova Nation is, I believe, what the kids say online. Tell me a little bit about your degree there, getting your BBA. How much that schooling experience, having the business and technical, kind of prepared you for this role. And some of your experiences through a program like that you look back on fondly.
For sure. Yeah. So I definitely was super lucky. I had an amazing college experience and I have, a lot to think of that experience for getting me to where I am today. So yeah, like you said, was in the Nova Business School. I studied information systems and analytics with minors in AI and accounting. So kind of a wide spread there of things, but was really just trying to get the most out of the experience. While I was at Nova, I was a member of our sports analytics club there. That's really how I found my way to FanDuel. Every year, the Sports Analytics Club would sponsor a couple of students to go to the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference up in Boston. So I went my junior and senior year, started my recruiting process with FanDuel there as they're one of the conference sponsors. And then, yeah, pretty much just got really lucky. The timing lined up. They were hiring a hockey trader, and here we are 2.5 years later. Um, but yeah, the Sports Analytics Club was a pretty big area of involvement for me. I was always very involved with the business school. I started and ran our first ever Business of Sports conference. So I was always, trying to create opportunities on campus for other students and myself, obviously, to break into the sports business world and kind of bring those companies and those resources to campus. And then the biggest piece of the puzzle was I did play hockey at Villanova. I was on our ACHA Women's D2 team. I definitely was the worst player on the team. I have no shame in saying that, but I was the president and captain of our program, and I ran just a lot of the logistics, a lot of the operations side there. Absolutely loved it. It was definitely the highlight of my experience. And then after I graduated, the ACHA actually asked me to stay on, join in kind of a full time position. So now the assistant commissioner for Women's D2, and that's been, a really cool way to kind of continue the journey, keep working with Nova, but just really round out that college experience.
Yeah, and I think that that speaks to getting involved in as many areas as you can, right? Not limiting yourself to wanting this one opportunity and really only going for this one opportunity, which I think is something that me and Nick try to push a lot, is like testing out different things and being involved as much as you can, networking as much as you can, because those are the relationships that'll ultimately move you further. And you just touched on obviously being an assistant commissioner for the women's ACHA. What does that role entail, and how did you get like kind of involved? I know you mentioned they reached out to you and asked you to stay on. Was that something that you had given interest in previously while you were still playing, or is that something that just kind of came out of nowhere?
I think it was a little bit of both. It was definitely something that I thought about that would be really cool to do. I didn't really know if they would want me there, but thankfully they did, and I've still been there since I graduated. But yeah, that role it's kind of completely different, technically speaking, from what I do at FanDuel. My role there is really on sort of like the hockey ops and logistics side. So as of this year, there's over 90 teams on the women's D2 side. So it's expanding like crazy. The ACHA as a whole is just growing tremendously and just providing such an amazing opportunity for students who are pursuing a bit of a different college experience than playing at the NCAA level, or just, however that all shakes out. But yeah, my role there is to pretty much just assist our commissioner, assist the rest of the ACHA staff, all the teams in our women's D2, and just make sure that it runs as smoothly as possible. So things like helping them out with their schedule, chasing things up in the back end, making sure all of our teams are compliant, making sure that they know that in a time of crisis, like I can be a person that they reach out to, help them resolve issues, and really just provide a awesome experience for the student athletes.
That's very cool. And I think it's cool to have that balance of, like you said, it's definitely different than your day job. And I feel the same between my day job and this and chatting with you guys here. It's nice to have that balance and kind of variety of experiences. I want to talk about women's hockey in general, though, for a second. You mentioned how much the ACHA is growing. Obviously, women's hockey across the country or the globe is growing so much, PWHL, etc. In your eyes, as a fan, as a former player, as somebody working in and around the game, what are we doing really well to grow women's hockey, and what could we do better at to, push the game even further along, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the PWHL was very lucky. Kind of the time that it all came together was when this huge boom was happening with women's basketball, both at the WNBA and at the collegiate level. So I think the foundation was really there to break in. And we see that now too with things like women's rugby, women's professional baseball. Like those leagues are all growing so quickly. And I think right now is just like the best time that it's ever really been for all this growth and success. I think in terms of things that are going really well, I think there's a lot of transparency with the PWHL, just from what I've seen being one of our product owners at the PWHL at FanDuel. Just in terms of the way that the league, updates its social media, keeps its fans really engaged. It sounds like it's actually really listening to its fans, which I know is some feedback that other leagues have received and are kind of working through. And so I think the PWHL really prioritizes that relationship, which I think is hugely important. The fan experiences that it has created with things like the takeover tour and sort of all the interactive experiences surrounding that, like it's really, reaching out to different areas where maybe women's hockey or hockey in general isn't that prevalent, and capitalizing on the ability to showcase it there. And I think stuff like that's awesome. Something I'd like to see more is really just getting the players out there more. I'd love for the PWHL to have someone, closer to a Caitlin Clark level. And obviously stuff like that takes time to kind of grow and rise to that level of stardom. But there are so many amazing names in the PWHL who have come to light either through their, NCAA experience, their experience playing for Team USA in the Olympics and whatever else. And so I think that the more that the league can sort of support the players in pursuing those opportunities and making them more household names, it'll position itself and the players a lot better.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think there's so many unique personalities within the women's game that if we can continue to highlight them, we'll just bring more eyes to the sport as well. I want to touch a bit on your internship experience at Sports Reference. What was the experience like, and was that what solidified you wanting to go down this sort of sports analytical career path?
Yeah, so it was actually a funny way that I ended up there. So it was so during my undergrad experience, I obviously, as I mentioned before, was always really involved in sports and was kind of seeking out opportunities to work there. But I never had like an actual experience that was in sports. I had two pretty long term internships in college. One was at Witham, which is like a mid-size accounting firm. I was working on software and analytics there, and then after that, I was at Deloitte for a year working on like it was quantitative consulting, but it's like a fancy way of saying soft computer science. So I was there and obviously those experiences were really great, made awesome connections, grew my technical skills a lot. But I always knew that like I had this just urge and desire to want to work in sports. And so I had a bit of time between when I was graduating and my Deloitte internship was wrapping up and my full-time role at FanDuel was starting. And so when I was sort of seeking out, what can I possibly do to take up the time and sort of position myself really well for the start at FanDuel, I came across the opening at Sports Reference. They were looking for a data engineering intern, and I honestly thought that it was a little bit above my pay grade. Like, I definitely had technical skills, but I was just looking for a way to sort of get involved on the sports level. And yeah, I went through the process there. And it was going from, a company like Deloitte, which is this huge global undertaking, to a company like Sports Reference, which is roughly the same size as like my entire trading team at FanDuel. Like it was definitely a big change of pace, but it was an unbelievable experience. Like working at a place that's more of like a startup vibe where everyone is so tight knit, everyone has eyes on what everybody else is doing. It really just shows you like it takes a village to build such a product, like to know that there's a company of 40 people that's supplementing all the sports statistics that all of these leagues and other teams and companies are using to sort of supplement their operations. Like it's crazy. And so being there, I learned just a ton about statistics and working in the back end, managing a website that's so customer facing that people are using to support their workflows kind of every day. Like now at FanDuel, I see how much we use sports references data. And so it's crazy just kind of having been on both sides and seeing how that relationship works. But yeah, it was an awesome experience.
Totally, yeah, it's always neat to kind of see both sides of the picture there. I mean, just knowing you a little bit, Sarah, I think, and evident through kind of everything you've touched on here between Sloan Analytics and, speaking to different schools and programs and courses, I think it seems like giving back to, the next generation, people who are maybe in the same spots that you'd been before is something that's super important to you. Tell us a little bit about, why you feel that passion and that importance to, keep paying it forward within the sports industry, women in sports, and kind of continue to give back to the community there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something you'll hear a lot in sports in general is like everyone always has to pay it forward, right? Like I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for everybody that I met at Sloan, everybody at Villanova, who helped me kind of get to Sloan and get to all of these other conferences and stuff that I was lucky to go to as an undergrad. All those connections obviously build on top of each other and help me kind of build the network that I have. And I've been in the position of that student who's reaching out to someone on LinkedIn and just getting completely ghosted. And I know how much it sucks to kind of be in that position. And so, as I was kind of going through my own experiences, I kind of made myself a vow that like, I'm never going to be the person, no matter at what point in my career that I'm in, that I'm too busy to like help somebody who, maybe aspires to be where I am or where someone else is in sports. And, in my time at FanDuel, I've probably taken like 1,000 networking calls. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Like I love talking about this job. I love talking about working in sports. I love introducing people to a job that they have never heard before, or, maybe giving them advice that sticks with them and sort of seeing where they end up. Like I just think it's so rewarding and something that we need to do a lot more of in the sports industry because it is super saturated. There's so many people who want to work in sports because yeah, obviously why wouldn't you want to work in sports? But at the end of the day, like there are only a limited amount of opportunities out there. And I don't want anyone to kind of get discouraged that they won't find a place because I really do believe that there is a position in sports for everyone. So yeah, I've just spent, the past couple of years talking on campuses or to students and just, taking these calls, making these connections, and, hoping that at the end of the day, everyone kind of finds their place in this industry and gets as lucky as I did.
That's very well said, and kudos to you for taking all the time and effort to do so and continue to give back to everybody there. I wanna jump back into that a little bit. You mentioned, having endless amounts of kinda coffee chats and networking calls with people. What's something that people can do better in those calls to maybe make it more meaningful, more productive, or get more out of it? And personally, to kinda give you my view on it, the biggest thing for me is when they don't reach out or follow up afterwards. Like a one-time call is hard to get anything out of or build an actual relationship, right? So for me, I always tell people to follow up and like, please bug me, like message me. Oh my God, did you see the Leafs game last night? Whatever it is after having that networking call. What's your view on that, and how can people stand out in those, initial introduction calls?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is a huge piece of it. I think the people who I at least have helped go the farthest and who I've found to have the most success are the people who always stay in touch, send me projects that they're working on, express interest in roles that we either have at FanDuel or that or somewhere where I'm connected with someone that I can sort of help them out with. Like you said, yeah, definitely staying in touch is a really big piece of it. I would say another big piece of it is really just doing your research, right? It's a lot easier to help someone who has a clearer vision of, what they want to be helped with. And obviously, like within sports, there's so many opportunities. And so I completely understand that, like early in, your undergrad career or wherever you really are, it's maybe a little more challenging to figure out, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. But my advice that I always give to people who are a little more uncertain about it is literally just go on LinkedIn, like look up things that you think could be interesting, read those JDs, read the profiles of the people who are in the jobs that you think you might want. I think like the biggest, I don't know if it's a misconception, but really kind of like one of the bigger things that I think that people get wrong about getting experiences and learning more is that you're finding what you do want. I think it's just equally as important to figure out what you don't want, right? So that when you're having these conversations, you could be like, okay, I talked to this person, they were super cool. What they're doing, super boring to me. I actually really don't want to do that. Um, so I think just doing as much research as you can about what you're getting yourself into, who you're talking to, what experiences they've been through, so you can ask the right questions and sort of get the right guidance is very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's very well said. And I'm gonna hop back in here again. I'm hogging the mic from Lucas, but you kind of touched on the different areas you focused on or learned about in school, Sarah. Obviously, again, a bit of a technical component to your role. I'm a tech nerd. AI, ML, it's the conversation of everything online these days. How do you see AI kind of impacting or helping what you do and what FanDuel does there? And how do you see it kind of continuing to evolve within sports in general?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for us, it's as traders, especially, it does so much to make our lives easier. We've had, a pretty big push for automation over the past year or so, particularly just in terms of, how can we automate more of our pricing systems, some of the processes that we go through so we can get markets to customers faster, so we can provide them with more betting experiences, stuff like that. A big thing for us is integrating things like chatbots, more personalization tools, really just customizing the app experience to the user, so that when somebody uses the app, they have exactly what they want right there in front of them, but also so it doesn't take them away from discovering something else in the app that maybe they haven't seen before. Um, so I think the more that we do of that, the more, people are just going to enjoy using the app and enjoy their kind of FanDuel experience. In terms of the sports industry as a whole, yeah, I mean, I think we're just at the beginning of it. I think really, I think especially on a league and team level, it's not any secret that obviously leagues and teams were kind of behind the ball a little bit when it comes to integrating AI analytics stuff like that. And I think we've all finally gotten up to speed that like, okay, we actually do need this. Maybe Moneyball was onto something. Um, so I think now that those organizations are actually, investing in these resources and building out these teams and hiring like the right people to do the right things, that we're definitely going to see a big push for automation and just making things more efficient, and kind of personalizing the fan experience, whether that's from the league level or the teams or all these other companies within sports who are just going to make strides to make their processes more efficient, and therefore the industry as a whole will just become more efficient.
Yeah, it's super interesting to see kind of how it's all evolved, and it keeps surprising me every time something new comes out that that kind of levels up the game. But To wrap things up, Sarah, we like to end off on the best piece of career advice that you could pass along to someone.
Think just don't say no to anything, really. Like, no experience is a bad experience. No connection is going to leave you worse off with it than it did before having it. So, really, just seek out opportunities, seek out those chats, and don't give up. Like, one of them will lead to something, and you'll ultimately kind of find your place in the industry.
Very well
Awesome.
said. Very well said. Sarah, we can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat here, share your journey, share some advice along the way. If somebody does want to reach out and be your 1000th coffee chat or networking call, where could they find you, Sarah?
On LinkedIn is the best place. I will respond to you ASAP and we'll get something on the books.
Confirmed. She does reply quick on LinkedIn. Sarah, this was awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you guys.
Of course.